The Attorney General Eric Holder says he shares the concerns of people angry over a jury decision that set George Zimmerman free, and he confirms the United States Justice Department is reviewing evidence in the case and considering possible federal civil rights charges. The Attorney General spoke just a couple of hours ago about the jury's verdict, a verdict that cleared George Zimmerman in the shooting death of unarmed teenager Trayvon Martin. George Zimmerman's attorneys argued it was self-defense. The jury agreed. Prosecutors said it was murder. Immediately after the verdict, civil rights leaders called it a failure of the justice system, and they called for the Attorney General to file charges, federal charges, against George Zimmerman. When the Attorney General spoke this afternoon, he did not indicate whether charges would be forthcoming. Instead, he echoed comments from President Obama yesterday that the case does raise important issues that the nation must address.
Independent of the legal determination that will be made, I believe that this tragedy provides yet another opportunity for our nation to speak honestly about the complicated and emotionally charged issues that this case has raised.
Meantime, demonstrators protested the verdict in big cities across the nation. The vast majority of those demonstrations have been peaceful, and there have been some small town ones as well. There are plans for more protests this weekend in some 100 cities from coast to coast. The chief Fox Sports correspondent Jonathan Hunt has this top story live in our studios here in New York. What else did the Attorney General say, Jonathan?
Well, Mr. Holder said the killing of Trayvon Martin was, in his words, quote, tragic and unnecessary. As for the ongoing DOJ investigation, he said that the department will continue to act, as he put it, consistent with the facts and the law. And he repeatedly said that everybody in the United States should see this as a chance for a national dialogue on the issues raised by this case. Listen here.
We are resolved, as you are, to combat violence involving or directed at young people, to prevent future tragedies, and to deal with the underlying attitudes, mistaken beliefs, and stereotypes that serve as the basis for these two common incidents. And we will never stop working to ensure that in every case, in every circumstance, and in every community, justice must be done.
So the investigation is ongoing, but there is no indication as yet, Shep, when we will get a final decision. Shep?
Jonathan, a lot of demonstrations, but the reaction has mostly been peaceful.
Yeah, the demonstrations that we have seen around the country certainly have been vocal rather than violent, although in Los Angeles last night, cops at one point did feel it necessary to fire non-lethal rounds. Take a look at this and listen. Hard to pick up there, but the cops were, according to protesters, firing rubber bullets into the crowd. The cops themselves call them non-lethal rounds, won't describe specifically what they were. 8 people in all arrested during those demonstrations in L.A., one of which shut down a major freeway. Meantime, here in New York, in Times Square, thousands converged there last night, having walked from Union Square about a mile south to make their feelings known under the banner of Justice for Trayvon. They also chanted, "No justice, no peace." But in contradiction of that chant, it does seem, Shep, that for the most part, while there have been a lot of demonstrations, the demonstrators themselves have acted peacefully. Shep?
All right, Jonathan Hunt, thank you. Let's bring in senior judicial analyst Judge Andrew Napolitano, who's also live in our studio. So some civil rights charges possible. Well, what do you make of it, Judge?
Well, they're very difficult charges for the government to prove. You know, Shep, murder is not a federal crime. Murder committed by a private person against another private person, a government official not involved. But the Congress can make murder unlawful if it's animated by racial hatred. So the federal prosecutors would basically have to prove, satisfy themselves, satisfy a grand jury, and then prove to a trial jury what the Florida state prosecutors were unable to prove, which is that George Zimmerman was animated by racial hatred when he pulled that trigger. Now, that not only defies the jury verdict in Florida, which was revealed on Saturday night, it also defies the federal government's own investigation, in which FBI agents interviewed over 30 witnesses, not only people who had knowledge of the case, but people who had knowledge of the background, the thinking, the value judgment, and the personality of George Zimmerman. And the FBI concluded concluded that this was not animated by race. So the government, the federal government, would have a very high bar here over which to jump if they want to indict and prosecute him.
And we won't know for a while, right?
No. And in fairness to Attorney General Holder, this is not something he can make a judgment call on today. He probably has to have all these FBI reports reviewed. He probably has to review the questions the jury asked, the information that was presented to the jury. I don't think you're going to see an answer from the federal government on this one for a couple of months. I hope that the answer is a legal judgment, Shep, and not a political one. But the federal government is under a lot of pressure to respond to the demonstrations that Jonathan just summarized.
You know, after the O.J. trial, the family of Nicole Brown Simpson filed a civil suit and won a $31 million judgment in civil court. Right. Is that sort of thing being talked about or a possibility here?
Yes, it's being talked about, and yes, it's a probability for the parents of Trayvon Martin to sue George Zimmerman in state court in Florida, at which he would be compelled to testify. The amount of money they could earn would be a jury's judgment of what Trayvon Martin would have earned if he were permitted to stay alive. Very difficult for the jury to figure that out for a 17-year-old boy, but that's what the case would be. They wouldn't be compensated for their grief, their natural grief at the loss of their child. They would only be compensated for the money he would have earned and probably left to them.
All right, Judge Napolitano live in our studios. Judge, thank you.
You're welcome, Shep.